Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Growing more with less is the mantra of Nebraska's corn farmers, and they're using incredible technology to do it. Soil moisture monitors let them know when their crop needs water and how much. GPS systems eliminate overlaps in the field, saving fuel and money. New hybrids reduce the use of pesticides and increase yields. When you're talking new technology and innovation, Nebraska corn farmers are all ears. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Whether it's spring planting, fall harvesting, or just a drive across the state, soy biodiesel helps a diesel-powered engine operate in a demanding job. Soybean oil from Nebraska soybeans makes biodiesel a renewable fuel that's also environmentally responsible. The soybean checkoff plays a major role in supporting the use and availability of biodiesel. The Nebraska Soybean Board, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Roy Smith looks at grain markets. Rick Rasby discusses hay quality. Bob Wright gives insect scouting recommendations. Vincent Amanor-Boadu talks about the potential for U.S. ag products in Africa. And Amit Jalla explains new weed control systems in corn and soybeans. Roy Smith is our grain market analyst this week. The latest USDA crop progress report shows conditions across the country remain largely unchanged. Soybean ratings are identical to last week, while the scoring in corn moved 1 point from fair to good. In Nebraska, rainfall has nearly made the state full again. The latest U.S. drought monitor from UNL shows nearly 98% of Nebraska in no drought classification, leading to the best conditions since July 26, 2011. We talked with Roy Wednesday morning and started by asking him to update us on his final sales of old crop corn.
I started around the 1st of April and finished up about the last 2 weeks in June, and basically my philosophy is always don't store corn through the 1st of July. Well, this year I was just a little premature. If you'd have held on till 5th or 6th of July, you'd have made had a little better price. But year in and year out, what I call the drop dead theory has worked very well, and it did all right this year. We left a few pennies on the table in this last rally.
Give me a quick update on what crops look like in this area of Nebraska.
Eastern Cass County looked really good. Western Cass County has had too much rain, just like a lot of other parts of the state, and so yeah, I'd say right here where we're talking, things look really good and our prospects are real good, but if you go 100 miles in any direction, it's not necessarily the case.
We've recently seen some pretty volatile movement in both corn and soybean markets. Were you surprised how hard markets reacted after that June 30th report?
I was surprised in a way because the markets were, as you said, very volatile and had a really nice positive response to the report. Now, having said that, I know when I was hauling corn there in May and early part of June, there was hardly any corn moving, and they were sort of waiting for my truck to get there to dump so they could fill a semi and go on with it. So there wasn't nearly as much corn in farmers' hands as what the trade would have us believe 6 months ago.
So if you look at soybeans specifically, they climbed the mountain, now they're kind of on the way back down, but in old crop corn or old crop soybeans, I suppose, if you didn't make sales on that run, what's the advice to the farmer now?
You still got the crop. It's still worth a certain amount of money. It's actually worth more today than it was a month ago. And you're probably going to need those bins. You don't want to store old crop and then have to go to the elevator with new crop. So I say that drop dead philosophy is still in place, and if you've got the old crop, get it moved, get it priced. We're quite a ways off the lows right now, speaking on Wednesday, so you know, I'm not going to tell you not to try to get as much as you can out of the crop, but I'm also aware that when things go up, they can go down.
You said one of the things that maybe people should keep in mind is that it's never a bad idea to sell to pay off notes. Why is that?
Right. You know, I get a lot of questions from people when the conditions are the way they are right now. Okay, what do I do? I don't know whether to sell or not sell. I'm just confused and lost. And my philosophy has been that in 40 years of farming, it has never been a mistake to sell grain and pay off loans. That the very worst that can happen if you do that is that you stop interest and you generate cash flow. And interest and cash flow are two things that are always there. And if you have grain in the bin, you need to be aware that you raised it to sell.
You wrote recently on agriculture.com about basis, and as we talk about it today, how do you look at it for using it in a marketing purpose?
Well, first of all, I'd say that you know, in my case, I'm sold out of old crop corn, so, and beans both, so just forget that and let's look forward. And I need to sell some new crop, corn and beans both. And the basis right now has widened out quite a bit because of the government report and the surprise government report that came out. And so, you know, I say you need to, if you're going to forward contract, which is a good idea most of the time, especially with a crazy market like we've got, you need to figure out a way of taking advantage of the basis. And if the basis is extremely wide, as it is pretty wide right now, look at either selling futures or selling hedge to arrive contract. If the basis that you're being offered is extremely good, then you sell a cash forward contract and you're all set. So it kind of works both ways depending on whether the basis suits your needs or not.
Now, we're not that far away from the September crop report, and if I remember correctly, you have a philosophy on that report, yes?
Yes. The strategy that has worked very well over a period of many years is sell the day before the September crop report. Last year it was off one day. That's 2014. So, but in general, the trade anticipates that September crop report, and when it's passed, then the price goes back down. So the way to beat that is to sell the day before or a couple of days before the September crop report, especially if you're going to take grain to the elevator at harvest time and you want to do cash forward contracts. That's a good time to do it.
Next week, Darrell Peel from Oklahoma State will join us to analyze cattle markets. Nebraska's wheat farmers are making progress harvesting this year's crop. While still behind the normal pace, farmers advanced 17 points over the past week to total 18% completion. That wheat straw could provide another feed source for the state's cattle. But Nebraska Extension beef specialist Rick Rasby says heavy precipitation events could be shifting the qualities of some of the state's other forages. As a whole, Nebraska is 3 points behind its 5-year average for the first cutting of alfalfa and 11 points off the average in the second cutting. We talked with Rick earlier this week to ask what producers need to know about how moisture could affect the resulting hay crop.
You know, we never cuss rain, you know, because we've been in a situation sometimes where we haven't had any rain, and so rain is always welcome and you don't want it to shut off. But yeah, it's been a challenge, you know, as wet as the spring has been, it's just been a challenge to get up good quality forage. And you know, a lot of that's, they try to put it up between rains, and sometimes it's been rained on. And so I think as you look forward, the idea from a cow-calf producer standpoint is that as we get into the fall, you sure enough want to sample those and get a nutrient analysis and get a good idea of what you have. And so from a nutrient analysis standpoint, for cow-calf producers, you know, check for crude protein, energy in the form of TDN, and then moisture would be the three things I'd have you test for.
Could it be drastically different than what you might anticipate because of the weather?
I think it could be. The thing is that it looked like to me that it was just difficult to get that hay down early enough when it was in a, I would say, a semi-vegetative state. And so, you know, it's hard for me to take a look at a bale and say this is the quality of that bale. And I think that's the reason why we'd have you take a forage sample and send it in. Any
storage considerations to take into account as you try to keep that for a couple months?
Yeah, I tell you, you know, some of it was put up pretty wet, and if we continue to have challenges and you get up wet forage, understand that there's some heating that goes on in that bale, and so excessive heating can lead to combustion, and so the idea would be to store it somewhere where if it does combust, you don't lose the whole stackyard, if you will. And so I think those kinds of considerations always need to be kept in mind.
As we see wheat harvest rolling across Nebraska, would that be another feed source that producers could consider?
You know, we've used wheat straw in a lot of situations. The nice thing about wheat straw is that it combines nice with distillers grains. And so if you may be short on forages as you move into the wintertime, the idea of, as you think about moving into the wintertime, having wheat straw is probably a good thing to have, especially if it's priced economically. And again, it does fit real nice with distillers grains.
Distillers grains could be an option then again this year, maybe?
It could be. You take a look at the recent prices of distillers grains, they've gone down. In fact, they're much lower than they were last year. And they're low price-wise compared relative to corn. And so we know that distillers grains is a good protein source and a good energy source. Sometimes it's a challenge to store, especially if you buy it up during the summertime. But modified will store really well without adding any forage to it. But you get into the wet, you probably need to add some forage to it to store it in a bunker or to store it into an ag bag.
The UNL Beef website has more information on storing ethanol byproducts. You can find a link to that on the Market Journal homepage. Nebraska's corn and soybean ratings improved this week. Both increased the share of the crop in excellent condition by 2 points. 72% of the state's corn is now rated good to excellent. 69% of its soybeans are placed in the best two categories. At a field day in Clay Center last week, we talked with Nebraska Extension's Bob Wright to learn which insects those growers should be aware of when scouting their fields.
We've been getting some reports the last couple of weeks of both green cloverworms and painted lady caterpillars in soybeans. Not at high levels yet, but it's something people may be seeing. Neither of these insects overwinter in Nebraska. They fly up each spring, and particularly probably the wet spring may have helped their populations build up to the south of us and they move up here. The main thing, not so much the numbers of insects right now, but how much feeding damage are they causing in soybeans. We have a threshold level of defoliation in vegetative soybeans. If you have still the caterpillars are still present, they haven't completed development, and you're reaching 30% defoliation, that would be a time that you'd want to treat. And this would be a field average of 30%. Sometimes it may be just one individual plant has a lot of defoliation, but not the whole field, so watch that. So watch for caterpillars in soybeans right now and see if what's going on in your area.
Any stem borer problems right now?
We're just starting to see the Dectes soybean stem borer emerge in central Nebraska this last week. A lot of cases in a corn-soybean rotation, they'll emerge from last year's soybean stubble and find themselves in a cornfield, and it takes them a while to move into the soybean field. We just completed a 2-year study funded by the Soybean Board, and it'll take them a good week or 10 days before they start getting into soybean fields and ready to start laying eggs. And they'll build up in soybeans for a couple of weeks. Some people are trying to treat with insecticides. We don't have any good data from either here or Kansas that helps routinely, but again, it's something to watch your fields and see. In many cases, maybe a border treatment would be something people could do and save some money before they get across the whole field, treat the border where soybeans were last year.
Sort of a preventative measure then.
Right, if they've had problems before, that'd be the cheapest approach, would be do a border spray before they get across the field.
Has bean leaf beetle been a problem?
No, not at all. Last couple of years, bean leaf beetle numbers have been decreased a lot because of the neonicotinoid seed treatments we have, which are systemic, and that's really knocked down the bean leaf beetle populations in a lot of areas.
Let's move to corn. Anything that producers should be aware of or should be looking for when they go out to scout?
Well, right now we're in the peak of rootworm larval feeding. We're getting to the last stage of rootworms in some areas. If you have a lot of rootworms, you may start seeing some lodging or bending of the plants. Another couple weeks, we should start seeing the adult beetles, and that's something you can scout for and try to assess what's going on in your field.
Any management options?
For the larvae, there are a few management options for post-emergence insecticides. Most people don't do that anymore because they don't have the equipment. Probably now just look to see if there's damage in your area and maybe be ready to treat for adults if you have high numbers of adults later.
Bob recently authored an article for Crop Watch on caterpillars in soybeans. We'll link to that information on the Market Journal homepage. The July Nebraska farmer says it's been nearly 3 years since the worst wildfire season in Nebraska history. In 2012, fire struck the Niobrara River Valley near Ainsworth and the Pine Ridge at Shadron just a few weeks apart. This month's issue says pasture recovery has been strong since then, but forest recovery will take some time. You can read about the challenges ranchers are facing in rangeland management and protecting existing trees in July's Nebraska Farmer. The recent International Food and Agribusiness Management Association World Conference in St. Paul focused on food security to 2050. At the event, we talked with Kansas State's Vincent Amanor Boadu, who conducts research in several African countries. The issue of food security on that continent is incredibly important. The USDA is projecting sub-Saharan Africa to be the most food insecure region in the world over the next 10 years. But Vincent says the traditional small farms across Africa could provide an opportunity for U.S. farmers to supply those markets with agricultural products.
The African economy is very dichotomized. You do have very poor people who are living on less than $1.25 a day. But you have a growing number of the middle class, and the middle class definition is very different from ours. In the African Development Bank defines middle class as people who are spending on average $2 to $10 a day. Okay, and that's the fastest growing segment. And those people are looking for packaged food products. They are looking for meat products. They're looking for dairy. And so when you walk into a supermarket in any of the African cities, it's full with these products, right? So it's a very interesting picture, usually when we talk about poverty and hunger and food security in Africa. It's very, very differentiated.
Do they have operations where you can build up livestock in those countries, and the U.S. could find a partnership with selling grain or feed products there?
So the smaller livestock like poultry is a great opportunity. So soybeans, for example, creates a great opportunity for entering the poultry industry, and that is emerging. The challenge we have to be cognizant of is that Brazil is closer, right, in terms of transportation of soybean and soy products to most of Africa than we are. And so we have to think about our cost of production, the cost of our transportation, and our value proposition, and then build these alliances so that if we have investments, then we can build those into the vertical integration components to minimize our competitors from that way. But that's the reality on the continent.
We talk so much in agriculture about Asia, China, and Japan and their importance, which they are. But what is the opportunity on the whole scale in Africa?
Well, think about it this way. 20 years ago, the location was Asia, okay? Today, what is happening is that Asia is in Africa, right? Buying land, producing, so that they can be food self-sufficient, okay? So here's our customer that we've built a lot of investment in, going out and building into production. What does that mean for us? We have to start thinking about this from the perspective of competitiveness. And I worry about that because I'm traveling around Africa and I'm seeing the Chinese, playing in all aspects of African life. They are building roads, they are building houses, they are investing in businesses, and I can't find any American company doing that. And for me, when I look at that, I project forward 20 years, the same way that we did when we had, Nixon opening up China, the whole engagement with China, which froze out, other players who had not figured out how to do it. And that's the same thing that I see here, where now, the American public policy engagement with Africa is one of trying to tell Africans how to live like us. Mm-hmm. And then the Chinese are coming in and saying, we want to do business. So from a long-term engagement perspective, putting into the fact, putting in perspective that the middle class is growing and they need products, I think that what we need to think about from our perspective is to look for opportunities to create markets for our farmers. I mean, first for our food products, which generally will use our farmers' products, and that chain creates opportunities for our farmers here.
Our past coverage from the recent IFAMA conference includes interviews on big data and international trade. They can be found in the June 19th episode of Market Journal. In our previous episode of Market Journal, you saw our coverage from the Weed Management Field Day in Clay Center. As Nebraska Extension's Ahmet Jalla said, participants were able to see new tools they might be able to use for weed management in corn and soybean production. One of those options was Enlist corn and soybeans. We briefly talked with Ahmet and asked him about the use of those traits.
Enlist corn and soybean are basically crop cultivars that are resistant to 2,4-D-choline and glyphosate. So this 2,4-D-choline is a new formulation of 2,4-D. It's not 2,4-D-amine or not ester, it's just 2,4-D-choline. So now industry came up with the crops that are tolerant to 2,4-D-choline and glyphosate in corn and soybean. So they are known as Enlist crops and Enlist weed management system.
You've done research with them. Tell me about the results.
Yes, so far for last 3 years we are conducting studies for Enlist corn and soybean. We have seen some very great crop tolerance with this new post-emergence herbicide that is a combination of 2,4-D-choline and glyphosate. And we have seen great crop safety and also weed control. Including last year we had an experiment for management of glyphosate resistant giant ragweed, and it has provided really good control of glyphosate resistant giant ragweed and some other weed species.
When will they be available commercially?
So Enlist corn and soybean, they are already deregulated by USDA, and right now Enlist Duo herbicide is also registered by US EPA, so the label is available, and I believe it should be available commercially from next year.
And Enlist Duo, what's Enlist Duo for producers?
It's a combination of 2,4-D-choline and glyphosate, so it's a premix of both of these herbicides, that is Enlist Duo, and that can be applied on Enlist corn and soybean. It can be applied starting from pre-plant until R2 growth stage in soybean and up to V8 growth stage in corn.
Now with the weekly weather outlook, filling in for Al Dutcher, here's Stoney Cooper from the High Plains Regional Climate Center.
As the El Nino intensifies, Nebraska continues to see above average precipitation. Welcome to this week's weather review and outlook. The upper half of the state was crisscrossed with storms this past week. Abundant rain equates to abundant soil moisture. Current readings in the state show that no one is below 40% field moisture capacity. This is abnormally wet, and as we will see in the outlook, does not appear to be changing soon. We begin the outlook with rain chances in the east and north central. Lows starting in the 50s and 60s and topping out in the 90s statewide. Don't blink for the next few slides, as Sunday and then Monday are carbon copies. Lows in the 50s west to 60s east, 90s throughout the state for highs. Tuesday is very similar, for the exception of some cloud cover in the far west that might keep highs in the 80s around Kimball and Alliance. Tuesday also sees the heat and humidity combined in the eastern half of the state, hinting at a heightened stress level for cattle in confinement. Orange is being severe stress and red is extreme stress. Wednesday brings the potential for clouds and rain from southwest to eastern sand hills. Although confidence in widespread rain is only 40%, 80s in the cloudy areas, 90s south and northwest. Thursday shows that system continuing northeast, cooling the eastern half of Nebraska into the 80s for highs. The panhandle warms back on the backside of that disturbance. With the warming, there's an increased enhancement of animal distress in the west, with the panhandle seeing some hint of extreme stress for confined animals. Bookending our forecast week, Friday sees the highs rocket from a warm start, with triple digits possible from Trenton to McCook to Arapahoe. Looking at the field moisture capacity at the end of the forecast period shows that midweek precipitation potential elevating moisture conditions even further, with runoff or standing water conditions forecasted around verdigris. Straying outside of our forecast period, just a quick look at the following Saturday's Cattle Comfort Index, showing widespread concern for animals in confinement. Even extreme danger is hinted at in the western portions of the state. The 8 to 14 days shows temperatures above normal and the precipitation near normal for the same period. Being in a strong El Nino, even with periods of heat, we generally see below normal temperature in the plains, along with above normal precipitation. The latest Pacific surface water temperatures point at an increase in the strength of the El Nino. The last time we saw this type of event goes back to 1982. As if to highlight the mounting strength of this event, here's a picture of snow falling in California this past Thursday.
Thanks, Stoney. Today's interviews can be found on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on corn and soybean markets, hay quality, insect scouting, food security in Africa, and new tools in weed control. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Next week, Daryl Peel will join us to analyze cattle markets. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board and the Nebraska Soybean Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board and the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Soybeans are found on dinner tables around the world. Some form of the soybean is found in baby foods, snacks, cooking oils, and many other food items eaten daily. And soybeans provide the protein in the diets for livestock and fish. The Nebraska soybean farmers support research to develop new soy-based products for foods, livestock, and industrial uses through their checkoff dollars. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
When we transform Nebraska corn into ethanol, it doesn't disappear from the food supply. It just takes a little detour. Ethanol is made from the starch. The rest of the corn becomes livestock feed to create meat and dairy products, corn oil, sweetener, and other food ingredients, and maybe a little carbon dioxide to make your soft drinks fizzy. Homegrown ethanol helps satisfy America's hunger for energy and the world's appetite for feed and food. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.